Jim, I've noticed a crucial error in the segment about Green Arrow, which you did in the previous episode.
I know. I got the diameter of the driving wheels wrong. It's 74 inches, not 78. Or to give the feet an inches specification, 6'2" instead of 6'6".
So it caused Christopher to read a bit of false information again? You dumbass.
You know, I was wondering why the driving wheels looked a tad bit small.
Now you know. It's because I'm a bit of an idiot at times. Then again, it's part of being human. Nobody's perfect.
That is true. Still, though.
You shot me! You shot me right in the leg!
Come on, Tom! How could you?
Finally, you're sticking up for me!
What? No! I want to shoot you. A bullet for each testy, actually.
Ah, come on!
That's life among this group, folks. Even if we don't have video footage of this, imagine this being like the start of one of Markiplier's Try Not to Laugh challenges.
Oh, boy! Oh, boy! We're off to a good start, aren't we?
Seriously? He uses that clip? Say goodbye to your balls. Well, that was pleasant.
And with that out of the way, it's time to begin part 3.
Now, let's get this show highballing.
What's that?
That's basically the American equivalent of right away in the UK.
Right away.
Wait, I'm up? Oh, okay. Number 10. LMS number 4767. This smart-looking British 460 10-wheeler is one of the Stanier Class 5 locomotives built by the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. Just to get it out of the way, if there's any real design flaw with this class, it's a bit of a fundamental one. The relatively thin frame plates are a bit prone to cracking. Other than that, they were, and still are, excellent engines. As for how many were built, let's just say it was a pretty mass-produced class.
How mass-produced are we talking about?
842 between 1934 and 1951. And no, I'm not dead.
Jesus! So if one breaks down, the only replacement is...
Yep, another one. Again, even with relatively thin frames, they were that good. Numbering is a bit all over the place though. Some numbered as 5000s, others 4700s, but engine 4767 is the most unique. Ordered on its own, it was completed at the LMS workshops at Crewe on the last day of 1947, just before nationalisation into British Railways in 1948. Among the 852 Stanier Class 5 locomotives, it was the only one to be fitted with Stephenson link motion instead of Walshart's valve gear.
There were a few other extras as well. These included a steam generator and electric lighting, Timken roller bearings, and twin smokestacks. Okay, double chimney. I guess that term's a bit more appropriate since in the UK they usually appear as a single casting with 2 exhaust holes as opposed to 2 completely separate exhaust stacks.
That link motion explains the pretty wild looking rods on the side when compared to the other engines so far. Do you know how it works though?
Sadly, I don't know how it works. Though I know it's piston driven like Walshart's valve gear, and that it makes use of rotating discs. Walshart's valve gear, on the other hand, only uses sliding pin joints. And then there's Baker valve gear, which is similar to Walshart's but uses rotating pin joints. It was very often used by railroads in the eastern United States, and all of the American locomotives on the list so far have Baker valve gear.
Anyhow, due to nationalization, the engine got 40,000 added to her road number to identify her as a locomotive built using an LMS design. Being a mixed traffic design, the engine was used on both freight and passenger assignments. It was in service for 20 years before being withdrawn from VR's books. Luckily, number 4767 became one of the 18 survivors of this class when she was bought by Ian Story, and then stored at Carnforth until 1974. That year, she was moved to Thornaby for restoration, which included being reverted back to her LMS number.
Once finished, 4767 participated in the 150th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1975. Later that year, the locomotive was named by former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, William Whitelaw. The name given to 4767 was George Stephenson. Thus, it was named after one of the two men that built a rocket in 1829 and set the basic principle for steam locomotives.
I can see the connection with the rods for the valve gear, no pun intended. Who was the other guy that built the rocket locomotive?
George's son, Robert. Now, to pull the viewers into the land of confusion. It was George that the locomotive was named after, but it was Robert that the valve gear was named after. And to really get things mixed up, it was designed by two of Robert's employees, draftsman William Howe and pattern maker William Williams, back in 1841.
Say William one more time and...
Well, the Class 5 engines were designed by William Stanier.
I don't know, I've gone cross-eyed.
Well then, it was a regular performer on mainline rail tours, particularly in Scotland. She was stationed at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, and at the end of 2002 she was brought out of traffic for a major overhaul. After the overhaul, which sadly for Jim included regaining the British Railways numbering.
There's too much BR black!
Whatever. 44767 was seen and stored at the several railways throughout the 2010s. These include the North Norfolk Railway, the Churnet Valley Railway, the Keighley-Worth Valley Railway, the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, and in that time she was down for another 2 years due to firebox issues, before re-entering traffic on the North Norfolk Railway.
Oh dear. Sounds like she was in the same boat as 2716. Since, like we said in the last part, that engine was also sidelined because of firebox issues.
Well, she's currently in bits for another overhaul back to mainline standards. As for liveries, I have this photograph of her in British Railways livery at the North Norfolk Railway.
I hope she'll return as LMS 4767 though. In my opinion, too many of the Stanier Class 5 engines are currently preserved with BR numbering. 16 of them in fact, not too long ago. It was quite different in the earlier years of the preservation movement, and I'll show it with these images of the following classmates. Prototype locomotive 5000, 5025, 5212, which sported this impressive wallpaper livery for a little bit, 5231, 5305, 5407, 5428. Heck, the last one is confirmed to be returning with LMS numbering from its current overhaul. Just a more balanced numbering ratio would be nice, is all I'm saying. Especially since all 18 survivors were manufactured before the days of British Railways.
I did notice you didn't mention the universal name of the Stanier Class 5 locomotive.
Yeah, you should mention it.
I actually don't want to, because AJ might not like it.
I can handle it, just like you can handle getting shot.
You'll still be mad at me, though.
Just say the name.
You'll still be mad at me.
Give me the damn name already!
They're called Black Fives. Despite some of them being tested out with various shades of green in the BR days, they were mostly black. And with about the first half of them numbered in the 5000 series, and all of them rated as Class 5 for both freight and passenger duties, they became known as Black Fives.
I understand.
Really?
Yes, I do. But you're still a racist douchebag.
Come on!
Well, that was totally expected.
I know. But here's an apology for Jim.
But it's not like putting two diesels together, one with a cab and one without, and then calling it master and slave.
That racist piece of...
Number 9. This is the first of 3 double bill spots on my list, meaning it's occupied by 2 locomotives.
So all this time it was secretly a top 23?
I lied.
Well, which engines are in this spot?
The number 9 spot is shared by Southern number 926, Repton, and Union Pacific number 9000.
Because they both have the number 9 in their number plates. Which also explains the picture of Adolf Hitler. Got it. I thought that was offensive, but you just took it to the extreme.
I know a good man who led Britain against this man. the only man to stand up to his crap, a man who scared him so much, one of our greatest prime ministers. His name was Winston Churchill.
So while Tom is stuck in the past, we'll continue, and we're starting this double bill on the UK side. Locomotive 926 was one of the Southern Railway's three-cylindered V-Class 440s. Designed by Richard Monsell, between 1930 and 1935, the Southern built 40 of these engines at their workshops in Eastleigh, numbered 900 through 939. However, they were more commonly known as schools, since they were named after public schools, with 926 being named Repton.
Right, I'm back. As for their design in general, despite being 440 locomotives, the schools were essentially a bit of a mix between two classes of 460 locomotives. Those were the four-cylinder Lord Nelsons, also designed by Monsell, and the two-cylinder N15s, or King Arthurs, designed by Robert Urey. The schools were designed to be powerful intermediate express passenger locomotives, so they were perfect for semi-fast passenger trains on lines which could cope with high axle loads, even if some of these lines had restricted loading gauges and short turntables. Ba-boom!
Makes sense to me. But shouldn't we go back to Repton?
Speaking of Repton, number 926 was built in 1934 and served the Southern up to the end of 1962. During its career, the engine was initially used on the Bournemouth route. She also spent some time on the line between Waterloo and Portsmouth prior to that line's electrification. Fortunately, she was one of 3 school-class engines to be preserved. The other 2 are Cheltenham and Stowe, numbers 925 and 928 respectively. All 3 engines were built and retired in the same years. But while Cheltenham and Stowe remained in the United Kingdom, Repton went on a transatlantic journey to the United States, when in 1966, the engine was purchased by an American who donated it to F. Nelson Blount for his Steamtown USA collection in Bellows Falls, Vermont. The British engine even went north of the American border, being loaned to the Cape Breton Steam Railway in Canada.
That's quite a tour that thing went on.
Yes, it is. But for running on my side of the Atlantic, Repton had to be fitted with a few North American modifications. These included a cowcatcher and knuckle coupler, an air compressor for brakes, a high-intensity headlight, and a bell. Though somehow it kinda works, especially with having the front buffers removed. The biggest modification, however, was in the form of higher sides for the coal bunker on the tender, which helped with fuel range over long distances.
Eventually, 926 finally returned to the UK, where she was sold again in 1989. The engine became part of the collection of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, and after a career there, she was pulled from service for a major overhaul. Fortunately, she recently returned to steam, once again as Southern 926.
British Railways haters.
I kinda am, yes. Now let's talk about Union Pacific 9000. This locomotive was the first of 88 unique 412-2 locomotives built for the UP between 1926 and 1930, and there's even a bit of LNER influence in them, since they had Gresley's valve gear setup. This was also seen on UP's slightly smaller 8800 class locomotives, and the Southern Pacific's 5000 class locomotives, both of them being 410-2 overland types. As for number 9000, she could be seen as Union Pacific's first real step in its race to design custom locomotives that were supposed to be the largest in the world. Indeed, the 9000 still have something of a record.
That being?
They were, and still are, the largest mass-produced rigid-frame steam locomotives in the world. And despite a couple of inherent problems, they were pretty successful.
The third cylinder was probably one of them, if I'm not mistaken. No stab at the Americans. Okay, a small stab then.
None taken, Tom. But it was. And there were 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the third cylinder was always pretty difficult to maintain because of the limited space. And secondly, in the US, the frames of most of our steam locomotives were made along with the steam cylinders as one continuous casting. So, yes, the frames and cylinders were all made from the same exact chunk of steel, often called the engine bed, as we can see in this picture of an engine bed for, guess what, a Van Swearingen Berkshire. But yeah, that's the trouble with 3-cylinder engines here in America. Because of how we usually make the frames and cylinders, they weren't very popular because of the extra work in having the 3rd cylinder and its running gear well maintained.
That overall length is probably the other of those problems. It would be a nightmare around curves in the track.
Well, they were in mountain country, but on the flatlands with wide curves they worked pretty well. So most often they were used for pulling freight trains on the flatter lines of the Union Pacific, right up to 1956 when the last of these engines were retired. 9000 is also the only survivor, owned by the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, located at the Rail Giants Train Museum at the LA County Fairplex in Pomona, California. Thankfully though, the engine is in good condition thanks to being well looked after by the museum volunteers and the dry climate in Southern California. Furthermore, remember the SB's 5000s? You know, those 410-2 Overlands that also had 3 cylinders and Gresley gear? That class, its sole survivor, number 5021, is also preserved there.
Didn't this engine have a feature you actually hate, Jim? Even though I like the feature, but still.
Ah yes, the air compressors or Westinghouse air pumps mounted on the front of the smoke box. In my honest opinion, this looks absolutely ugly to me, and I usually don't like steam locomotives that have this. But the 9000s didn't always have this. Some of the engines actually had them mounted on the sides for a bit, as we can see on this picture of classmate 9012. It still looked like, oh my god, that's so beautiful! And the smoke box is a bit asymmetrical because of that curved handrail on the bottom and a small step and grab iron on the left. But to me, it does look quite a bit better and cleaner. So for the overall class, I can let it slide in this case, since some of the engines didn't always have the air compressor faces.
Ah, I can also see that not all of them had Gresley conjuncted valve gear. Probably some modification to make maintenance a little bit easier.
Sorry to interrupt, but this has to happen.
Oh no, don't tell me!
You can't possibly be talking about.
Yes, I am.
Well, the unique factor of 9000 is, well, guess.
It's over 9,000!
Of course.
What? It was obvious. It's better than that one angry racist Austrian.
9,9,9,9,9,9! Chocolate!
Number 8. Yet another double bill. And Tom is going to love this one because it features a pair of LNER A4 Pacifics.
I'm listening.
Alrighty then. This slot is shared between engines 4468, Mallard, and 4489, Dominion of Canada.
Excuse me for a moment.
Jesus. The guy really likes his LNER locomotives, doesn't he?
I do, and I'm damn proud of it. These two beauties are examples of the LNER's A4 Pacifics, of which 35 were built between 1935 and 1938. These streamlined masterpieces were designed for express passenger duties on the LNER's East Coast main line, and to do so frequently at speeds of 100 miles an hour and beyond on a regular basis. These placed the A4s among the pinnacles of British steam locomotive development. Seeing how as they were designed by Sir Nigel Gracie, that's only appropriate. Today, 6 of the 35 A4s are preserved.
As for numbering of this whole class, however, it was one of the bizarre ones. More mixed up than the V2s, to the point where AJ may grab a bottle of beer. The first 4 were numbered 2509 through 2512. The next 17 were numbered 4482 through 4498. Then 8 more numbered 4462 through 4469. Then another 2 as 4499 and 4500. And the final 4 can be collectively called the 4900s, since they were numbered 4900 through 4903. Lack of consistency much?
I find your reply to be logical.
Yep, drinking time. They definitely catch the eye though with that streamlining. Any reason why those two are so special?
May I?
You may.
Now then, as some of us in this group are aware, and most of you in the audience are probably aware as well, 4468 Mallard is the world's fastest steam locomotive. Built in March of 1938, the engine smashed the world speed record for steam engines when she was only 4 months old. She was sufficiently run-in, yet new enough to handle such a monumental task. On her record run, Mallard reached 126 miles per hour over Stoke Bank, just south of Granville. Despite having suffered a melted big end bearing on the running gear of the middle cylinder, the engine wasn't damaged enough for retirement. In fact, 4468 lasted in service for over 25 years, finally retired in April of 1963 when she became part of the old Railway Museum in New York. This would eventually become Britain's National Railway Museum, where Mallard remains one of the biggest showpieces.
In contrast, 4489 Dominion of Canada is actually the older locomotive of the two, despite the higher road number. Built in May of 1937, she stayed in service for 28 years before being pulled from the active roster in May of 1965. Interestingly, 4489 was also used for a record attempt. At that time, the LMS had the fastest steam engine in the world, locomotive number 6220, the Coronation, which reached 114 miles per hour. Unfortunately, Dominion of Canada only reached 109 miles per hour. When retired, Dominion of Canada got a similar future to Repton from the last segment. She went on a transatlantic journey to be donated to Canada and ended up at Expo Rail, the Canadian Railway Museum in St. Constant, Quebec, near Montreal. Unlike Repton, however, the engine was to remain on this side of the Atlantic.
Well, there was that one exception where she was temporarily shipped to the NRM here at York. The lads here gave Dominion of Canada a cosmetic restoration, so she looked like she was brand new, and became one of the big attractions during the Mallard 75 exhibit in 2013. During this exhibit, all 6 surviving A4s were gathered together for a celebration of the 75th anniversary of Mallard's 126-mile-an-hour speed record, a record that she still holds to this day.
Neat!
Now, for the uneducated people who don't know the entire roster of surviving A4s, let me mention them with their London and Northeastern road numbers. But if for some reason you prefer the wartime Northeastern numbers, or the British Railways numbers, I will mention those in the subtitles. Now then, 4464, Bittern, 4468, Mallard, 4488, Union of South Africa, 4489, Dominion of Canada, 4496, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and 4498, named after their designer, Sir Nigel Gresley.
And there were other names for some of these engines too. To give those names, 4488 was originally named Osprey, and 4496 used to be called Golden Shuttle. Funny enough, Dominion of Canada was going to be called Woodcock, initially running in trials at Doncaster Works Grey with apple green wheels.
Damn the diversity in names! Animals, people, countries, what's next? I'm going to need another beer.
Give me a good old-fashioned pint, I say. I have to say, I am one of the many thousands that went to York in 2013 to see all 6 of these locomotives together. I was lucky enough to go inside the cab of 4489 Dominion of Canada, and I have to say she's my favourite A4 of the lot. So much so that the 00 gauge modelled manufacturer Hornby came out with a limited edition model of her. I had to get my hands on one, and luckily I did, along with a friend of mine who bought 6008 Dwight D. Eisenhower. Jim and Christopher, good job on the narration apart from the Americanization of the numbers.
I'm sorry, but that's the way I learned it.
And I adapted to it.
Traitors.
Number 7. The last of the 3 double bills. And perhaps the most epic one, too. To give my buddy Jay Shebler something to cheer him up, I'm busting out the awesome music for some Norfolk and Western locomotives. Those being 1218 and 2156. Oh yeah, we're talking NNW articulated power now.
Meh. I still prefer my A4 Pacifics, but I suppose these two are alright.
Well then, allow me to get started with the history of 2156.
Go ahead, buddy.
Thank you. This 2882 Mallet is part of N&W's massive Y-Class family. The specific class that 2156 belongs to is the Y6As, of which 16 were built, numbered 2155 through 2170. They were all constructed in 1942 by the N&W's East End shops in Roanoke, Virginia. So to Tom and the British audience, yes, the N&W was one of the few American railroads to build some of its own steam locomotives in their own workshops, and they preferred to have them fueled by coal. As an extra bonus, they sometimes used the word railway in their company name.
Suddenly, the N&W became a bit more awesome, but just a little bit.
I'm sure it has. But back to the subject matter. At the time, the Y6As were the most powerful steam locomotives in the world, with a tractive effort of 166,000 pounds. The only engines more powerful than them were their direct siblings, the Y6Bs, which had a tractive effort of 170,000 pounds. Like most of the other Y-Class Mallets, 2156 was used for pulling mixed freight trains and heavy coal drags around the N&W system. Being a Mallet, 2156 is a compound articulated steam locomotive, as is hinted by the huge cylinders powering the front set of driving wheels, which are a bit reminiscent of how your mom looks.
Chris, you're the man! Nothing beats a classic your mum joke, but how does that compound system work?
Well, you know there's a steam dome on top of the boiler of most engines, right? There's a valve for where the regulator, or throttle, or wherever you want to call it, is located.
Yes.
When that valve is open, the steam is first channeled to the cylinders powering the rear set of driving wheels. Once that steam expands and pushes the pistons back and forth, it's channeled through flexible steam piping to the larger front cylinders, with some of the piping visible in this picture of Y6B number 2180 during maintenance.
Those cylinders are larger because the second-hand steam they used was a bit colder and provided less pressure. When expanded for the second time within those huge front cylinders, then it's channeled into the smoke box, where it mixes with the smoke and fire exhaust before shooting out the stack.
It sounds like it helps with efficiency, so they used less fuel and water than you might think at first, right?
Indeed it did. Eventually, 2156 was retired in 1959 and donated to the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, Missouri. But in 2014, a 5-year lease was signed, allowing the locomotive to be borrowed by the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, where 1218 resides. As for 1218, it's also a Roanoke-built product. It was one of the railroad's simple articulated 2664A class locomotives, of which 43, numbered 1200 through 1242, were built between 1936 and 1950. Basically, an unofficial Challenger locomotive. I say unofficial because they only had 2 pilot wheels instead of 4 like real Challenger locomotives had, with their 4664 wheel arrangement. Christopher, you may take it over again.
Thank you. The A's were a bit more of a heavy-duty mixed traffic or dual service design, as despite use on coal drags and freight assignments like the Ys, they were also used on large passenger trains from time to time, which were too heavy for the smaller engines. But the 1218, which was built in 1943, was mostly used on freight trains. Also retired in 1959, it was sold to Union Carbide for use as a stationary boiler before being purchased by F. Nelson Blount for his Steamtown, USA collection. Naturally, it didn't stay there for long. It was loaned out to the Virginia Museum of Transportation before ownership was eventually transferred to the VMT. This opened the doors for restoration to operating condition by Norfolk Southern at the Irondale Steam Shops in Birmingham, a process that began in 1985.
The restoration efforts were completed in April of 1987, so about 9 years before I was born. The locomotive shined up to the end of the 1991 steam season. The plan was then to give 1218 a more thorough workover to have it ready for 1996. Now that would have been an epic present for my birth.
Talk more about the 1218 and less about yourself.
Sorry. Sadly, during that rebuild, the Norfolk Southern steam program suffered some serious bad luck in 1994. Following the deaths of William and Robert Claytor, see my subtitles to see how important they were, things went downhill. Fast. Major restrictions were placed on the steam engines, limiting the times they could operate and where they could go. Fueling the fires of misfortune were the rising insurance costs, from $10 million to $25 million, with another increase the following year.
And finally, there was the yard switching accident in Lynchburg, Virginia on September 28th, where 9 of the steam program passenger coaches were damaged and derailed, 2 of them beyond repair. And so, in December 1994, Norfolk Southern ended the steam program, while 1218 was still in pieces.
Quite a crying shame. So all that hard work for nothing. A crying shame.
Yeah. Though judging by some of the images, it's safe to say that the engine was reassembled.
Of course, reassembled in 1996 to be specific, though with a few components missing. After being put back together, it was towed cold from Birmingham to Roanoke's East End shops, where it was stored until 2001. That was when Norfolk Southern donated it to the city of Roanoke and put it on display at the VMT, to which it was donated proper in 2012.
Lots of donations, that's for sure. But now, for a probably dumb question. Can it be rebuilt again?
Short answer, yes. Anything can be rebuilt if you throw enough money at it. But long answer, it's not too big of a nightmare, given what's still on the engine is probably in good mechanical shape, and any missing parts can easily be remade.
At least it looks sharp.
Just a minor shame about that gap in the front of the smoke box, located on the left. I get it, there's a hot water pump behind there, as part of the Worthington feed water heater system that all the A-Class locomotives had. But some of the earlier A-Class engines, and a few of the later ones, actually had it a bit more covered up, giving a more solid appearance. Like on this picture of 1208, where you can only see a fairly faint seam. Or here on 1203, where it's more of a patch job, but still more solid.
The Governator!
Stop whining!
But it shouldn't be that big of a thing to fix, right?
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
The Schwarzenegger has spoken! Now move to the next locomotive.
Number 6. London, Midland and Scottish, number 6233, Duchess of Sutherland. Concluding Part 3 is the middle child of the 3 preserved LMS Princess Coronation Class Pacifics. The ultimate in LMS passenger design, 38 of them, numbered 6220 through 6257, were manufactured between 1937 and 1948. And yes, they were designed by William Stanier, the same guy who designed the Black Fives.
Are we going to talk about the different Williams again?
No.
Good.
Now then, the princess coronations were often referred to as duchesses, since engines 6225 through 6234 were named after duchesses. As you already heard, 6233 was named Duchess of Sutherland. As for the other survivors, those are locomotives 6229, Duchess of Hamilton, which Chris and I already talked about, and 6235, City of Birmingham. Sticking with Miss Sutherland for a bit, 6233 was built in 1938 and stayed in revenue service until 1964. That same year, she was bought along with Hamilton by Sir Billy Butlin to be put on display at the playground of one of his holiday camps.
And obviously,
You mucked up.
I did. I can't help it. It's terrible. I'm such a terrible person.
Nice. Mature.
Zip it, Shrimpy.
And obviously, to say the children were excited by seeing a giant steam locomotive on the playground would be an understatement. Not as giant as those Norfolk and Western articulateds we looked at, but still massive in their own right.
Yep, some of the biggest in the UK. After a period of storage and display at Bressingham Steam Museum in Norfolk, number 6233 was acquired by the Princess Royal Class Locomotive Trust in 1996. Naturally, they own a Princess Royal Pacific too, engine number 6203, Princess Margaret Rose. Miss Sutherland arrived at the Trust's West Shed at Swanwick Junction on the Midland Railway in Butterley in early February of that year. In 2001, the locomotive returned to the national network after an overhaul assisted by the Heritage Lottery Fund and match funded by the PRCLT.
To allow the engine to operate on the main line, Duchess of Sutherland was fitted with train protection and warning system, on-train monitoring recorder equipment, and the British Railways fitted automatic warning system. Those systems will be called TPWS, OTMR, and AWS for short. Try saying that when you're drunk. And throughout her preservation career, the Duchess has scored quite a few liveries.
Initially, she was restored as LMS 6233 in Crimson Lake livery, that lovely shade of red the LMS like to use for their express passenger engines. Then in 2010, she was repainted in LMS black for a year. This also looked striking. Sadly for Jim, however, in 2012 the engine was out-shopped in British Railways Brunswick Green, and being an LMS locomotive in the BR livery, it got the required 40,000 added to the road number, just like 4767 did.
I'm going to puke.
She's currently being restored and repainted into LMS Crimson Lake again. You know that.
I feel better already.
Anyway, 6233 also got to pull the Royal Train a few times, in 2002 and 2005 specifically. And to honor Stanier's legacy, she was lined up with 3 other surviving Stanier Pacifics at Crew Works during their open day in 2005. The 3 other Pacifics were the previously mentioned Duchess of Hamilton and Princess Margaret Rose, along with the oldest survivor, number 6201, Princess Elizabeth. Though for this celebration, Margaret and Hamilton were in BR numbering, and 6235 was a bit difficult to get because it's enclosed indoors at Think Tank, the Birmingham Science Museum, since 1997. And despite the complementary color contrast, it would have been clashed a bit by being green while the other 4 were all red.
I think I like the green on it. But I'm only saying that just to piss Jim off.
Bastard!
It was to be expected.
Well then, that was part 3 down. Expect part 4, containing the top 5 and a bunch of honorable mentions, in a few months or so. It'll be thrilling. I assure you.
Yes, yes, yes. We've heard it before.
Why do I sense awesome music approaching for part 4?
Because that's what those engines deserve.
Seems legit. Now then.
You shot me! And you shot me in the balls this time!
Mm-hmm. My aim was a bit off, though.
Words cannot begin to describe how much I hate you right now.
Aw, thank you. Love you too.
And yes, delays are inevitable for production for the last part as well.
There's something about that new picture of 2716. And no, it's not the more modern diesel-era font on the cab and tender of the locomotive. Wait a minute. Dear God. That picture wasn't a coincidence. It was prophetic.